So today was one of the most interesting days of my life. And I don't say that lightly because I have had some absolutely wonderful days. But today was particularly special because it was a moment of achievement, a moment of coming home to myself, a moment of greater clarity of my own power and who I am in this world. And I don't say that to sound grandiose or self-aggrandizing in any way. It's just, years ago, I started to shift my priorities around what would make me feel successful in life, what would make me feel like I was accomplished. And I moved away from notoriety, outward success, fame, money, and instead shifted towards living with bravery, creating art, doing things that are meaningful, and surrounding myself with community. And if we don't create self-value on how much money we earn or how many followers we have, then we have to earn our value somewhere. And I stole my value system from the lovely, incomparable Brene Brown. And yes, people in the comments, I am basically a 40-year-old housewife. I know, it's okay. I admit it. But something she says that I very much latched on to is courage should be our value system. With how much bravery am I living? And I just achieved something that took a tremendous amount of sustained bravery over months and months. I finished my novel, or at least an entire draft of it. And yes, writing a novel in and of itself takes a tremendous amount of bravery and courage and a willingness to show up day after day to a keyboard and risk yourself, risk failing, risk your soul. But if you listen to my story, you'll understand why, for me, this was particularly a triumphant moment that made me feel empowered and like I had achieved something that added to my self-worth. So if we haven't met before, it's a pleasure. I'm Kay, I'm an ecstatic life coach, and I run this YouTube channel, Ecstatic Self, about finding yourself, finding your bliss, finding your joy, regardless of what that looks like. Now, if you follow my channel, you've probably heard stories about me working in my 20s as a professional actor. I attended Northwestern University and then the Second City in Chicago's year-long conservatory program, and was very much vested in the idea of my self-worth, my feeling of approval in the world would come from audiences and casting directors, and feeling like that I'd achieved something because I had developed a robust career as an actor. Well, that only lasted for so long. Around the time I was 28 years old, I moved to Los Angeles, got an agent, a manager, booked a bunch of stuff, but realized that I would never be happy. That my self-worth was not going to ever truly be found from receiving it from the outside. And then began a very long and arduous process of figuring my shit out, figuring out how can I be happy, what makes me feel successful. Well, 2 years go by and I finally decide, you know what? I think I'm going to write. I have this idea for a fantasy novel about this kid who's part dragon and he has a really hard time accepting that part of himself, and it will be this beautiful allegory for coming out and accepting your sexual identity and seeking wholeness. And so I spent like 9 months writing and rewriting this book. I wrote it like 4 or 5 times through. I found a professional editor. We collaborated on it together. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of this. I created something I really love. And I feel like I'm aligned with my life's mission. My husband was super proud of me. He's like, yes, this feels much more integral to you and what you're doing. And then you can imagine what happened. I started to send out query letters and sections of the manuscript to different agents. And you know, when I moved to LA, people told me, oh my gosh, it's impossible to find an agent. I've been here for 4 years. I'm still struggling to find one. And like, I found one in 2 months. Like, I didn't think it was that hard. You submit to enough people, eventually you'll find someone who wants you. So imagine my surprise and disappointment when I ended up, over the course of 4 or 5 months, submitting to about 250 different literary agents and not getting a single one who wanted to represent my book. My editor said, why don't you just self-publish? I said, no, I want to have the level of humility to think that if everyone in the professional world is not giving me a chance and not thinking it's worthy of representation, and I get it's really hard. I get that you look at some of these literary agents and look at their past 9 months of submission and they haven't accepted a single manuscript. I get that there's 4,000 books published every single day, but I still want to have the humility that maybe my book isn't to the point I think it needs to be. Maybe I should just shelve it. And between you and me, I was devastated. I had a couple of really dark emotional days where it was like, fuck, is there even a point? Like I put myself out there. I shared some of my deep, heartfelt lessons, my trauma as a kid, and this feeling of being rejected after sharing my story, it feels re-traumatizing. It feels horrible. I thought maybe I'm just worthless. Maybe I'm just a failure at everything in life. Maybe I should just give up. Should I even bother to live anymore? I legitimately had those thoughts for a couple days. And my husband, God love him, he is so often can be my mentor and my teacher, as I can be for him sometimes too. But he said to me, this whole process of writing was so fabulous for you. You were so turned on, you were so aligned with yourself and your mission and your values. But as soon as you started submitting, like even the language was the same, I need an agent. This is very reminiscent of you seeking validation as an actor, of wanting that external approval. And I think we need to shift away from that and create work that gives you self-worth in and of itself, but you don't need it from others. So I shelved the book. I just hid the document on my computer and I went on to other things. Started writing some short stories and some essays. I got a couple short stories published in some online journals, and eventually I had the idea for my book that you've seen, Journey to the Ecstatic Self, a workbook for settling into your skin, cultivating authenticity, and reconnecting with your radiant self. And about that same time, I started this YouTube channel. I started my private coaching practice, working with people one-on-one on their own journey of finding belonging. And it felt wonderful. I had no qualms with self-publishing that book and just putting it out there because I was like, no, I know what this is. I know it needs to be out there. I know that I created something of quality and I don't need that validation from the rest of the world. And so life continued on. My husband and I bought our first house. I renovated much of it myself. And as those months of work were winding down, this book kept coming back to me. Like I tried to move on to other novels, I tried to move on to other pieces of fiction, but I kept thinking about this book, about this bullied, awkward teenager who's part dragon and desperately wants to be someone else, to be somewhere else. And so I started rethinking it. I started rethinking, how can I make this more connected to me? How can I tell a truer story, a deeper story, a more full story? And so I started pulling it apart and restructuring it. I aged up the protagonist so he became 18, functionally an adult. I shifted the narrative voice to first person so I was speaking through the character. And I think most importantly, I made him overtly gay. It no longer was an allegory. He is gay. He has a boyfriend. He talks about his penis like, I like to do. He's still awkward, but he's real. I brought a lot of myself into the character, a lot of my own things that make me feel uncomfortable, a lot of the things that, necessarily aren't mainstream. Like this character discovers that just because somebody's attractive and is suddenly into him, if they don't really value for him, he doesn't want to hook up with them. He doesn't want to get sexual with them. Like I brought my stuff that isn't cool, but is authentic to me. And the few people I started to share bits and pieces of this new manuscript with, people who had read my original version of this book, were like, I liked your original version, but I'm so glad you waited, because this is the story you needed to tell. And for the last several months, several days a week, I've been sitting down and trying to figure my way through this and to work through it and say, how am I going to redevelop this book? And can I get to the end? Can I get to the end? And even like 3 weeks ago, I was thinking, oh, well, it's going to take like 3 or 4 more months of work. I don't know how long it's going to take. My husband, I think like 10 days ago, was like, maybe you'll get it finished by Christmas. And in the last 2 days, I wrote the last fifth of the book. I wrote almost 20,000 words over the course of like 36 hours, which I don't know if you know writing, but that's a fair number of words. That's quite a lot. And so I got to write on my keyboard just a little bit ago. He walks into the room and says, Mom, I'm home. The end. The end. I got to write the end. And for me to have come back to this project, to come back to this story that I so desperately wanted to share with the world and felt so bludgeoned by, felt so rejected by society, and say, well, fuck this. I think this story has value and I want to tell it. I think this story needs to be heard. And to show up, even though I was beaten down, even though 250 literary agents and publishers told me no, to say, I'm still gonna fight. The fact that I was still willing to show up, even after all that heartache, that showed that I had courage. And that living with courage gives me self-worth. To quote Theodore Roosevelt, and you're probably very much familiar with this quote, I actually, again, first heard this because of Brene Brown, so thank you, Brene, I love you. It is not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. It's not if you succeed, it's not if this book gets published, it's not if anyone thinks of it as a bestseller or one of the greatest fantasy books of all time. It's that I fucking tried. It's that I, who spent days thinking, should I even live because... It's having spent days thinking, should I even fucking live because the world tells me I have nothing of value to contribute, to say, fuck you. I am gonna get up and I'm going to offer my soul. I'm going to try again. And whether you like it or not, I could give two shits. I don't fucking care. And more than that, yeah, I'm gonna see if I can get it traditionally published. I'm gonna see if I can get an agent who can sell it to a publisher so that it can reach a wider audience. And hey, if you're a fan of my YouTube channel and love what I do and know someone in publishing who can represent this book, by all means, please hook me up, because it's always about who you know. But even without that, I'm still gonna submit. I'm gonna pass it along to Tom, Dick, Harry, Evelyn, Shaniqua, Kyrie, whoever will look at my book, I will give it to them to read. And after a couple months, I still can't get nobody to read it. Fuck it, I'm gonna publish it myself, like I did my nonfiction book. Because why? Because I believe in what I have to share. And I think this has value. And because at the end of the day, I wanna live with courage. And when I do that, when I live in a courageous way, I develop worth. So in doing this, yeah, that's one of the best days of my life. So is the day I said I do to my husband. So is the day that I adopted my puppy. So is the day I first ever kissed a boy. So is the day I came out on Facebook. So is the day I first ever went to a bathhouse in Paris and got to feel unashamed of my sexuality. So is my first yoga class. So is the day I showed back up in the gym after feeling defeated in my body. There are all these moments of triumph. But notice, not one of the ones I just said were when I won that award, or when I had that day where my YouTube video hit 100,000 views. It was quiet days of purpose and value to me. And so I wanted to share this with you today. I wanted to share with you how I am living in a way that is meaningful to me and giving my life purpose. And I sincerely hope that you are able to find the same.